What's the most awkward situation you've ever been in with a stranger? I worked security at an aquatic theme park and was watching Jeopardy in the employee entrance. One of the veterinarians came through and watched it with me for a bit. He said he watches it religiously and he'd passed the test for the show and was hoping to get selected. He'd heard that they like to have a diverse group of contestants and they hadn't had a black guy for a while, so he liked his chances. A few days later, there are 2 black contestants, so when I see him leaving the next time I say, "Hey, did you catch Jeopardy last week?" "No, why?" he responds. "There were 2 black guys on it," I explain. He just stares at me blankly for a few seconds and walks off. That's when I realized it was a different gentleman than I had the previous conversation with. In the cinema, I interlocked my fingers with the kid sitting beside me for a full minute. Turns out, he wasn't my kid. The most awkward moment of my life thus far was with a stranger. I was in Quebec airport going through customs with my family. Because of some recent changes to their system, they didn't have everyone in a line, but instead in a large pen, where they would release 50 people at a time. Chaos. When my family is at the front, they release us and everyone is running forward in a mass trying to get to the kiosks. Next to me is a tall Swedish man trying to get his family a kiosk. He is running forward and waving his arm behind him in a come on motion, clearly frantic. Well, somehow the worlds aligned where his middle and pointed finger went perfectly into my 2 nose holes. Perfectly, as he then ripped his arm upwards to motion his family forward. My nose was also ripped forward, and I immediately began bleeding everywhere. He looked at me in horror. My family looked at me in frustration as we needed to get to a kiosk. The customs agents looked at me in bewilderment. The language barriers made the situation all the more awkward. At the airport, I walk up as the elevator door is closing, and there is a woman inside with a stroller. I slowed down because I wasn't in a hurry and would rather catch the next one. Then I saw a little girl about 2 or 3 is playing in a flower pot thing nearby. I realized she was likely meant to be on the elevator with her mom, but the doors are closed by the time I put it together. I walk up to her and said, "Did your mommy get in the elevator?" She just shyly smiles. I sit down with her and decide to wait in place for a few minutes for the mom to realize. A minute or 2 later, a man walks up and says, "Excuse me, can I have child?" in a thick Russian-y accent. I was trying to decide what to ask to figure out if she was his kid when the elevator door reopened and the woman came flying out yelling for the girl. She hops up happily and runs over to the mom. I stared at Guy with an accusing look, then he turned and got in the elevator too. I don't know what the heck was going on there. Was he with them? Did he think I was trying to take their kid? Was he a creeper following them? So awkward. I literally sat silent through the whole weird encounter. It was my first time voting in a presidential election in 2016, since becoming old enough to do so, and polling place was at a library. When I get to the front of the line and start filling out the required papers, I mention it's my first time and what to do next. After hearing this, the woman who was working there and helping me raised her voice and said, "Hey everyone, we've got a first time voter here," and started clapping, so they all would clap as well. Nobody clapped, and I was just standing there really embarrassed before quietly saying, "Can I just go vote now?" My wife and I went out for a drink one night. We walk into the bar. I see someone I know at the bar with their back turned, walk up behind them and tickled their sides. Turned out I didn't know this person. They just gave me a weird look and walked away. Got their spot at the bar though. When I was young, I thought some random lady was my mum and tugged her skirt. She turned, screamed, and I screamed back. Not my proudest moment. When I was a teenager, my friends and I would spend the weekend staying up late playing video games and eating junk food. I was also a cross-country runner, and on this particular night I was experiencing some extreme chafing from a long run earlier that day. While we were at the gas station getting Doritos and energy drinks, I announced to who I thought was my friend, "Man, my nips really hurt." Upon realizing it was a complete stranger with whom I had just shared this intimate detail, I simply stared at him and said, "You're not my friend," and walked away. I didn't go back to that gas station for a long time. I worked at Old Navy and some lady was looking at men's shirts and she stopped me and held up this shirt and asked if I thought it would fit her son. I looked around and no one else was around. We stood in silence for maybe 30 seconds before she started laughing and said, "Oh haha, you don't know my son, he lives in Michigan. We were in Washington state. Never mind me, I'm just stoned haha." And then she went and bought the shirt. At an art studio in LA, my girlfriend was wearing a denim jacket as we looked at a piece together. Out of the corner of my eye I saw the jacket and I reach over to grab her butt. A sudden no comes from beside me and a woman 30 years older than me is standing there blushing. I tell her I thought she was someone else and run away to my girlfriend. A few minutes later the lady comes and finds us to talk about young love and how cute we are while making too much eye contact with me. I was at a movie theater with my brother. We were watching Pacific Rim. During the action scenes he had to fart like a motherfucker, so he waited until the music was at its loudest to be inconspicuous. The second he lifts his butt cheek and begins, the music stops, and all everyone can hear in the movie theater is a giant foghorn of a fart. Imagine the music in action scenes, how it builds and builds and builds, then has a moment of silence for a bit more drama. Then a fucking shard sounding fart takes it over. The reactions from the people in the theater were laughter, WTS, and wow reallys. We were laughing so bad we were crying. Every time I casually talk to a stranger, say bye, then we end up needing to walk the same way for a while. My son had small Toy Story figurines, but wanted big ones for Christmas. I walked into Toys R Us and asked the male clerk, "Do you have a large Woody?" He turned bright red. I wheeled around and marched out and didn't go back for months. Was adopted at birth. Learned who my birth family was in early 30s. Had met a sister but nobody else yet. Sister tells me grandpa is being taken off life support, cancer, and want to talk to me before he dies. Travel to hospital several hours away. Meet mom in hospital lobby for the first time ever. Go to grandpa's room where all of his and my family are. They are all there to say their goodbyes. Probably only 5% of them knew of my existence. Suddenly all the attention is on me, the stranger. They have me kneel by his side, and he apologizes through tears for pressuring my mom, that I just met, to give me away for adoption. People looked pretty shocked, including me. The experience was 1,000 emotions and awkward was in there somewhere. I was with my mum buying flowers at a florist for a New Year's Eve party. The florist was obviously a very lonely woman and wouldn't stop going on about how she isn't doing anything for New Year's and how it's so nice we have friends to visit, to the point where it became really saddening. My mother obviously really felt for her. Every now and again, maybe twice a year, she has a brain fart and accidentally says what she is thinking. That day was one of those rare days. After paying for the flowers, my mom said thanks, hope you find a friend soon. I look at her in shock, the woman looks at her in shock, and my mom just gasps, apologizes and literally backs out of the store. God, it was so awkward. Posted this before. That time I screamed at a woman over poo. My little village has a small annual dog show. We normally enter our little dog who has one friendliest dog, Waggy's tail, and dog the judge would like to take home in the past. This year she was unfortunately in season, so we didn't enter to prevent any fuss from the other dogs, but took her along to watch. Halfway across the park she decided to poo, and I suddenly realized I'd forgotten a bag. There were loads of other people with dogs around due to the show, so I wandered away a little to ask someone for a bag. I turned back, and to my horror a lady was picking up my little dog's mess. Not wanting to feel like one of those a-holes that doesn't clean up, I ran towards her to advise her she didn't have to do that, because I was going to get it. Instead, in a sort of panic, I waved my arms and barked, "No, that's my poo." Please note that I did not say, "That is my dog's poo." She physically jumped, then turned a deep red. She sort of mumbled an apology, dropped the poo, and marched off with her dog. It was at that point that I looked to my left and saw my dog's poo sitting a few feet away from the lady's dog mess that she was attempting to pick up. I think about this at night sometimes.